So welcome to another week. I'm one of your co-hosts. I'm Philip.
And I'm Arthur.
And
this is Outside the Church Walls. Man, it's exciting to be back in the studio, Phil.
So good.
I love always coming to downtown Dallas. You know, the city's thriving, has the energy. It's busy. It's woo-wah, woo-wah. Everybody's doing things.
That's right.
People have AirPods on. People walking around with their backpacks. People are on a mission downtown Dallas, right?
That's right.
But you know what's crazy?
Tell me.
I feel like throughout the busyness, I feel like the one thing that I often think about is I wonder how everybody's mental health is. A question that has actually rung a lot in my head over the course of the last 5 to 6 years, maybe even.
Yeah.
And I think it's such an important topic to discuss mental health, especially because the signs are not always apparent. I mean, it's different from physical health, right? You can be eating Chick-fil-A, Whataburger 2, 3, 4 days in a row, and then all of a sudden,
Guilty.
yeah, same here, man. And all of a sudden, you might start to notice a little pudge, and you're just like, oh, well, I need to scale it back a little bit. You know, that those jeans are not fitting like how they used to.
Yeah.
And so, but with our mental health, it's not always as noticeable. What do you think about that, Phil?
I think that's great. I think it's spot on.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's why we want to talk about mental health in our podcast early.
Right.
It's not going to be the only time we're going to talk about this probably.
Right.
But we definitely want to hit it early. And I think that's so true. Is often if we're not careful, our mental health will go unnoticed. And then all of a sudden a big episode happens.
Yeah.
And we try to say that's only one time, or that was a moment.
Right.
That was a bad season. But in reality, if we were to step back and look at the puzzle pieces, to look at it and see it as a whole and say, hey, actually, this is been an ongoing thing. And so, but at the same time, I want to make sure for us, we may not be giving the official diagnostic definition, but what would you define mental health when we talk about that?
Yeah.
Because so many people think mental health could for a long time, it used to be like mental health used to be like you're in a psych ward, and it was like, they're kind of mentally unstable.
Yeah.
And then
watch
now,
out.
in the last few years, it's become socially acceptable to talk about it, mental health.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the joke is always like, so tell me about your therapist. And it's like on like a first date, you're kind of like,
right.
So how long you been in therapy, and, are you going to keep going or not?
Yeah, exactly, right? Well, it's interesting because I was having this conversation with a friend on another podcast. Shout out Teresa, if you're watching this. I had a conversation with Teresa about how mental health today is what physical health and going to the gym was like back in the early 2010s. You know what I mean? It was just such an explosion on social media to be able to see fitness videos, fitness influencers. And now, fast forward to today, still as popular, but what's as popular is now it's mental health therapists coming out, speaking out, providing resources. Of course, Instagram has changed a lot since probably 2010, 2013 when I've been on it, when I first got on it, because back then it was all about putting 3, 4, 5, 6 filters on a picture.
Yeah.
And now it's all about, wow, I can actually learn something from Instagram and following the right people, of course. So, but no, we do want to get into mental health and talking about it, but first defining it.
Yeah.
What is it? I know for a lot of us, we have an idea of what mental health is. The way I would define it, Philip, is I would define it as being just the bandwidth to be able to handle your day-to-day stresses and how you're contributing to society and how you handle yourself within yourself, but also with society from a mental standpoint.
Yeah.
What about you?
No, man, I think that's really great. And I think that what tends to, and people are asking the question of, hey, how is your mental health? They look for those buzzwords. How are you handling anxiety? How are you handling panic attacks? How are you handling depression? How are you handling your workload in your own capacity of your brain?
Yeah.
Like, how are you doing emotionally? Like, one of my old mentors, Tito, he would always say, hey, like, how are your RPMs? How are you doing relationally, physically, mentally, and spiritually?
Wow.
And so he would ask that, and it's like we could do that with our mind and be like, okay, how are we doing relationally? How are we doing mentally? How are we doing physically and spiritually? And so, when we talk about mental health, we want to kind of hit this at the beginning to be able to address kind of our journey as well.
Yeah.
Maybe things that if you're going to listen to this, man, we encourage you. We're probably going to hit some things of like what we did well, in our journeys, what we did bad, and what we did
a lot of that,
right? Like we wouldn't want to do that again.
Yeah.
So learn from us and the mistakes. We're not experts here. I mean, we're just two jabronis talking about our faith and trying to get the word out at the same time, sharing our journey in this. And so I think we're going to be hitting that, and then also some scriptures within that. So if we were to give you kind of an outline, it's not going to be in that exact way, but things to look forward to in this podcast.
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, as we were preparing for this podcast, I remember me and Philip talked on the phone, and one of the main things that we wanted to not just focus on, we didn't want to just focus on the issues that we went through, because we could spend hours and hours and hours talking about the issues, but then it go nowhere. This podcast is about giving you the applicable tools to be able to take with you and say, wow, I see where Phil's blind spot was, his issue was, and he did this to reroute. Arthur's issue was this, and we're going to get into specifics, trust me, about what it was. What did Arthur do, and how did he get back on course? That's why I love Google Maps, man. I'm a big fan of Google Maps because, like, I'll take the wrong street, and guess what? After living in Dallas for about 10 years, I still take a wrong street, even while following Google Maps. But what I love about Google Maps is it reroutes, and it's sometimes all about the rerouting, and it can reroute all day, all night. But until you actually follow that rerouting, that's when you're going to get to where you need to get to.
That's right.
But it starts with rerouting, and then it starts with following it through. Obedience.
It's good.
Am I preaching earlier already?
You're already going. I mean, he's on fire.
All right, I'm going to calm down. We're just getting started.
That's right. So let's dive in.
I mean, for me, I could talk all day, all night about my issues. I know, right?
We know. It's not therapy.
It's not.
This is not therapy.
Are you sure? Because this couch feels very comfy.
I know, it's very similar, but it's not therapy. I'm not your therapist. So.
You know what? I wish you were, because you're one of the few people to get me to laugh. See, we're doing it right now.
It's good, yes.
And speaking of which, we are going to talk in a future episode about friendships, which is very important in mental health.
That's right.
But
so when we come to mental health, I guess let's just dive in. And so give us that, 30,000 foot view, if you will, to start.
Yes.
Your journey of mental health.
Oof. All right, here we go. I promise I'm going to keep it sweet, succinct, and I'm going to try not to derail. Okay, all right?
Good.
All right.
I'll be the judge. We'll see.
Yeah, feel free to call me out.
I'll help our listeners out.
Yeah. So for me, mental health came out of nowhere, and it started just like many of you, perhaps. It started around the pandemic time, and it started around that time frame really when everybody started talking about mental health. Of course, y'all know when the pandemic started, everything shut down. We were forced to be inside. I stopped going to work. I wasn't going to work anymore. My gym shut down. I couldn't even work out anymore. And to be honest, and I want to be very sensitive about this, because I know for a lot of people, the pandemic was a hard time. For me, I felt like a kid at a candy store. I was thrilled. I was actually thrilled that everything stopped, and I was getting to work from home. Only because at the time, I had a job that was very toxic to me. And I remember just the next day when they announced that we were going to be working from home officially, I leapt for joy. I gleefully leapt for joy, and it was just amazing. I felt really great. But there's a saying, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing, and it was very much a bad thing. Only because I'm about to touch on a couple of issues that I have with my mental health. These issues I've had for a long time, but it only became more apparent to me during pandemic, because I think for a lot of us, those small issues became bigger issues during the pandemic, because all of a sudden we had to be confronted with ourselves every day. Our commutes from 45 minutes turned to 2 minutes now. It's all of a sudden we're going to the
roll out of bed and there's your desk.
Boom. Yeah. I'm like basically like doing a cartwheel to my desk and I'm there saving a lot of money on gel.
Can you do a cartwheel?
I could, but
I was like, we can post that on social media later.
Yeah, it'd be probably a very poor cartwheel.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't done one in a long time.
Yeah,
yeah.
Be there.
Yeah, I had to add a little dramatization for the listeners there.
That's right.
But if you just picture me doing a cartwheel, out of bed to my desk, and there I was. One of the issues that I analyzed within myself was that I was a person that dealt a lot with anxiety. Actually kind of still do. And we're going to talk a lot about that later. But first, let me say anxiety, why? Okay, for me, I found out that I'm a very controlling person. I found out that I love to know what's going on. I love to know the end result. And when I don't, that's when I start to kind of get anxious. Okay, I want to know what's going on. Yeah. And that's not great. I hate it. I don't love being that controlling person, but I am.
Yeah.
And then mix that with like an ego and a pride that I also had. It's a recipe to also stay even more siloed and more secluded within these walls that I've created around me. So that's basically in a nutshell where my mental health journey started.
Yeah,
I'm leaving out a lot.
You are.
Okay.
You are. We're giving that high view that, you know, for you, you're saying officially it started back in pandemic era and became to be noticing it more in detail and being able to define it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how did I find out about it? I'll touch on this really quickly. For instance, like, have you ever, how can I put this? Have you ever been somewhere where, you know, you played a game or you've been somewhere where there were no rules? That's how pandemic felt for me. It felt like the longest pajama party ever with no end.
Yeah.
I realized that, hey, I didn't have to wake up super early to catch a commute, so I could stay up super late watching YouTube, mindlessly scrolling. So I was sleeping less. I was eating more because now all of a sudden, like, I could eat out every single day. Uber Eats was good to me. Postmates was good to me.
Yeah.
I was friends with the Postmates drivers on, you know what I mean? So, that was ways that I was finding out that I was trying to cope with my mental health. I was like, oh, let me cope by putting more food in my system, or let me cope with staying up late and, you know, watching funny videos or whatever it may be. I just felt like I was trying to fill gaps to calm my anxiety, but I was still an anxious person.
You're still just trying to numb some of that pain.
Exactly.
And you're trying to numb it to be able to escape from that.
Yeah.
That's a normal thing. We all have that.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, I guess it was like, man, like, I didn't realize I had a problem until I realized, like, okay, I noticed that no longer am I seeking out to even socialize. Like, I kind of created this bubble around me, and it was like, I was like, okay, at least when I was going into work, I was having conversations with people.
Yeah.
And, you know, on the weekends I was seeing people. But now you take everything where, like, we're not going into work. We're only seeing people, like, through a computer, and it's not the same. It's just like, I was just like, wow, I just feel really alone now.
Yeah.
It's like, it's kind of weird.
Yeah.
I don't know. Did you go through any of that, Phil, during the pandemic?
Yeah, my pandemic experience was a little bit different. I was located in Michigan at the time, and Michigan was one of the longest tenured closed states. And so we were closed for about 7 months or so. But I was married at the time, and in my marriage, I had my marriage, and then I had my youngest daughter, or my oldest daughter now, but then I had my parents with us. And so we all were in a house figuring it out. I mean, the funny thing, I remember my mom being like, okay, guys, we've made it 2 months. We can make it more. And we looked at my mom and I said, Mom, it's been 2 weeks. And so she was like, oh my gosh, this is eternal. And it's because we were all locked in. And so, but you know, my mental health journey didn't start in the pandemic. Mine actually started a little bit before that.
Oh, wow.
And so mine probably has been undiagnosed for several years before that, but it was during, probably about 2018 or 19 and some change around there, that I began to realize my battle with depression, anxiety. I began to have panic attacks.
Wow.
And so much so where I began to go on medicine, and I'm no longer on medicine now, and that's my choice. And I feel like I'm in a better, healthier spot, and we can walk through that another time.
Yeah, definitely.
But I began to early on realize, hey, I was not stable enough to make it, and so I needed a little boost to help me get going, and then I began to have therapy, began to jump into having a counselor, a therapist, be able to walk through some of my story and some of my own things, and so you know, I would encourage anyone who's listening to this that, like, man, jump into therapy. It only helps.
Yes.
And if your therapist sucks, get a new one.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna be real. Like, I went through 3. And then my 4th one, I was like, you're the bomb.
It's
And-
like finding somebody to cut your hair.
Yeah.
You know, when they don't do a great job, you can always find another one.
That's right. And usually, and I know it's hard because you're retelling your story
Yeah.
to all these people, but you want to find somebody who you connect with
Mm-hmm.
and who's going to like really help you.
Yeah.
And so like and I did not do that early on. I did the one and done. I did this guy did not click with me. They all are that way. No therapist is good. Like that was my story. And I know I'm not the only one out there who does that, but I did that. And then I tried again and it was the same. And then I had friends say, hey, try it again. And so I said fourth a minute ago, but I think my last therapist was my third in Michigan, where it really was like, this is clicking. This is doing well.
Yeah.
And I have a therapist down here in Texas now that I really clicked with. And I was like, man, like this it takes time,
Yeah.
but our minds are so worth it. And also when we're healthy,
Mm-hmm.
we can be healthy to those around us.
Absolutely. And I think I love what you said, because a lot of the times we think mental health is just so personal to us, but you have no idea how much of a benefit it is to the people around us. Like it's a tremendous like effect on them as well. So for us to be also aware of our mental health is just going to have so many different effects on people around us. And I'm just
Also,
yeah.
for those of you who are listening who are single, it's also like, attractive thing when you're like, when you have a good solid, like, I don't even know what I'm saying here, but a solid grasp on your mental health.
Yeah.
And so because
It really is. Yes.
it's huge.
Yeah, no, definitely. I want to give a big shout out on that note. I want to give a big shout out to my mental health connect group in which I lead. I'm very fortunate. Guys, y'all are listening right now. Y'all are awesome. It's so funny because I think I really should touch on this story really quickly. So remember how I just told you that whenever the pandemic had started and I realized that I wasn't socializing,
Yeah.
the girlfriend that I was dating at the time forced me to join this mental health connect group. At the time, where nobody was getting around in person, nobody was gathering in person, we were able to jump online through Zoom to be able to talk.
Sorry to cut them off. Just as we're recording, they
Yeah.
are doing construction below us.
Yeah,
So
I
our
just heard
floors,
that.
I hear it in my floor underneath my feet. It's vibrating. So keep going. Sorry.
I
It
know.
just was like construction in Dallas. It's always happening.
Construction in Dallas. So if you're listening on the podcast and you hear a
And
little
you hear
bit
a little
of buzzing
brrrr.
sound,
Sorry.
yeah, it's, shout out to the Dallas construction workers. We love you.
We love you.
Um,
Anyways, so you're in your mental health group.
Yeah, no, and so I joined this Connect group, and it was interesting because at the time, shout out Becca. Becca was leading it, and I learned tremendously a lot about mental health through a faith lens, what that looks like with a relationship with Jesus Christ, and I'm so thankful for that. Come to find out now, a year later, I would end up leading that Connect group.
Wow.
Who would have ever thought, right?
Yeah.
Through an invitation, through assisting, through staying consistent, that now I'm leading a Connect group about a topic now that before I had no idea what it was about, to today actually getting the chance to talk about it. It's amazing.
It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. You never know until you really get honest about yourself.
Right? That's what I think. And
Yeah.
it's just like, that's actually, and I don't want to give too much away, but that's actually one of my strategy points. And we're going to talk about just how we combat mental health or the lack of good mental health. Because there are some practical ways that you can combat against mental health.
So I wanted to ask you this, and
Yes.
it's when you say your mental health, would you say it's more anxiety, depression, panic attacks? Is there other mental health ones that I have not named? Those are usually the top three. So I named those three.
Those are the top three.
But
Those
there are
good.
other ones, obviously.
Yeah.
And so when you're saying for you, because like for me, it's depression.
Right,
I run to depression more than anything.
right,
It's not, some would say it's anxiety, but it's mainly depression.
right.
And so what would you say for you is that mental health struggle? Because mental health is that big, bold word.
Yeah, no, good question. So for me, it's anxiety, but how do I arrive at anxiety? So anxiety is the summation of basically of worries, fears, stresses, all building up, bubbling up. And for me, it's that. It's I have worries, stresses, and fears about things that maybe haven't happened yet.
Yeah.
Things that I overanalyze in situations, right? Whenever it's like, I don't know. I also happen to think sometimes I have like imposter syndrome, which is like when I tell people that, they're like, "What? Like how? Like you just seem very confident and very charismatic and very enthusiastic." Yeah, maybe you're right, but but actually no. It's also the fact that I'm my hardest critic to myself.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us can probably relate to that, right? It's like, oh, like, hey, like, you know, you could have done that better.
Yeah.
You know, you said that, you did this, but you know, you could have done a whole better job about it. And so, like, yeah, for me, it's that.
So let me ask you this with that.
Mm-hmm.
For those who maybe have never struggled with anxiety, what is the feeling? How would you describe the feeling of anxiety?
It's like a racing through your mind. Your heart starts to beat really fast. Maybe you start to feel out of breath. Words start to jumble. Your mind starts to, again, like I just said, it just starts to race. You just start to feel very clouded in your thinking.
Yeah.
Like somebody could be talking to you, but you're not present in the room with them, listening to them.
Yeah.
So why? Because your thoughts are probably racing and they're speaking, yelling louder than them. So it's just kind of like, so I think that's
really helpful just because I think there's some who, in every experience is different. So we acknowledge that. But it's helpful to for those who are listening who maybe they haven't had that in a while or they've never had that you know, because like on the flip side, so if you're anxiety, mine's more depression. And I kind of thought today, how would I describe the feeling of depression?
Yeah, because when I think of depression, this is what I think, and you can check me on it. Okay. When I think of depression, I think of unenergetic, tired, to yourself, secluded. Would you say that's kind of like?
Yeah, man, I think those are characteristics of depression. I think that can be, and when I get depressed, I do pull myself away. I pull away. I get down. I get Debbie down. But it's like, for me, the battle of depression, the imagery that comes to mind is essentially, think about going bungee jumping.
Yeah.
And you're tied, and you may be able to go really, really far, but it's going to snap you back.
Yeah.
And I feel like for me, at times, the battle of depression in my own life is that bungee cord. And that as I will have highs, and I will get to go really far, and it'll be a great few days, but I know that bungee cords are going to snap and bring me back to the center of that low, of that frustration, and it leads to some dark thoughts, and it leads to wanting to isolate. And again, depression looks so different for so many people, but for me, that's what it is. It just is. It feels like I long for the day where I can just cut the bungee cord and just be free.
Yeah.
And just be like, I want to cut this and just be free and be able to go wherever I want. And, you know, there are helps that have helped do that, but when you don't really attack it and really make war on it, then it's that bungee cord. You're trapped and you never get out. You just feel like you're stuck.
Yeah. No, Phil, that's a good point. I actually really like that. Let me ask you a question. So during your depression, what did you do perhaps that worked against your depression? What set you back rather than get you on
You mean
course?
kind of what gave in to my depression? Like, yeah. What did I give? Well, clearly I was just given those feelings of isolation. And so for me, I would either like fully give in and go those deep, dark routes. I can think of times where it was very dark.
Yeah.
And I would write things that I deeply regret and am sad for.
Yeah.
And what I was doing was everything I would say is the opposite. So I was isolating. I was giving in, for me, things that I know that fill my flesh, if so, or my own self-gratifying. So alcohol. I was giving into pornography. I was giving into food. If I wanted to eat it, I would go eat it.
Yeah.
I was giving into whatever I wanted to do because I was depressed and down. And I said, screw the world and screw people. I don't care about them anymore. And I would also put on a face. I'd put on a mask because the reality of when it was really dark, I've had two really, really dark seasons in my life. From, I would say, the last several years has been dark. The most recent one was I walked through a very rough divorce, and it was And before that, I was in a very rough church planning section. And often when people would see me, they'd be like, "You're handling this so well." And I'd be like, "You're right. Everything's good." And internally, I was like, "I want to die." And internally, I was being like, "I don't care what you're saying. I don't want to be here."
Yeah.
And I would look at people and be like, "You're right, man. Isn't God good? God is so good, right?" And I was lying.
Right.
In reality, I was burning on the inside.
Yeah.
And I was doing anything possible to stop the pain, but I was doing more things. The things I kept doing were resulting in more pain.
No, and it's good. And I actually thought about something that I remember I had a friend tell me he told me, he said, Arthur, you're treating symptoms, but you're not getting to the root.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes we are just superficially putting a Band-Aid over something that could require like surgery.
Yeah.
And it's like we're not getting deep enough into those like root things that are actually gravitating. That's why whenever you just said, you were like, "Oh, like I feel terrible inside, but on the outside it's like I feel great, and I was going to eat here and do this and do that." It's like, yeah, I was also doing the exact same thing. Yeah. It was like I was going for that quick fix for food, for laughs. Like, again, like I thought I could find satisfaction in these like things that honestly gave me perhaps a pleasure of like maybe 5-10 minutes, and then again it was like, oh, why am I worrying again? Why am I stressing again? I thought that Brahms Sunday was gonna do it for me, and it felt so good. But and then it's just like, side note, I don't want to derail, but side note, y'all, isn't it the worst when they mess up your order when you didn't even plan to maybe eat that bad thing, and you said, you know what, I'm gonna eat it, and then all of a sudden they mess up the order, and you're like, if I just would have just stuck to the plan, you know. So, but no, anyways, that's really good. And
I mean, and the reality is we're looking for a short-term fix, but the reality is we have a long-term and real need. The only one person can fill, and we know that to be Jesus Christ.
Exactly.
And the reality is we are, as much as we, you know, this podcast have talked about our journey, we know that Jesus alone is the one who fixes our hole. And he's the who's the one who fixes that desire, that need in our life.
Facts.
And we've been looking for those quick fixes, if you will.
Right.
But there's a real fix.
Yeah.
And I was doing the complete opposite. I was ignoring. I was isolating. I mean, I remember this last in 2023. I moved back down to Texas, and I had a friend be like, "Hey, you're ignoring me, and you're hiding from me." And I was like, "Yes, I am." And I looked right in his face and I said, "I am."
Yeah.
And it was because I was saying, I don't think this is the truth. I don't think this is good enough.
Yeah.
But when you realize it is, you're like, I'm an idiot.
Well, and what happens is, like, all of us, we're all guilty of doing this. We're guilty of letting our feelings kind of run the show. And what I've told my group that I lead, I tell them, hey, feelings, they're real, but they're not facts.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like you may feel anxiety, and anxiety actually is a good thing to the point where, like, if you've ever been in traffic and somebody cuts you off and you had to slam on the brakes from having to hit that person, that was anxiety in motion. Anxiety will keep you alive. It's your fight or flight. Yeah. But oftentimes is like, what happens is your body sometimes is misreading what's going on in the world, and your fight or flight kicks in for no reason, and it thinks that things are happening, and it's not. It's just, that's another thing to consider. And so when it comes to our feelings, it's great that we acknowledge them, but we shouldn't give them the driver's seat to our lives.
That's good.
Quick illustration. I had 2 bonsai trees in my lifetime. One bonsai tree I owned, I neglected it. I failed to give it water as much as I should, and it died. Yeah. The other one, I was like, no, I'm going to do better. I'm going to make sure that I feed it, so that way it doesn't die. What ended up happening is it ended up dying from being overfed. Much like our feelings as well, it's great that we acknowledge them, but we don't overfeed into them. Yeah. You know, there has to be a balance. Yeah. And that's good. Yeah. That's what good.
Are you getting that illustration? I mean, that's real life. I think you're like, I think that's good. I mean, I could never take care of a bonsai tree my own self. Yeah. But
sure you could. I'm sure you could. If you tried.
I don't like plants.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I didn't know this about you.
I'm not when I get to people's houses and
Yeah.
they're like, "Look at all my plants."
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm just like, they attract bugs, which I hate anymore. And I'm like, it's upkeep and all this. And then like you have the friend who's like, "Will you go over? I'm on vacation. Will you go water my plants?" And you're like, "No."
So you wouldn't even consider having like, let's say, like one of those elephant ear plants? Oh, really? Nothing basic like that? Okay.
No. If I get plants, I better pay a landscaper to come over and take them. Like, because I'm just like, I don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds like your plants stay outside.
Yes.
That's where you like them.
Right in the heat. But so we've kind of in this first episode, if you will.
Yes.
They didn't know, but this is going to be a two-parter. Sorry, gotcha. Boom. Two-parter.
Zinga.
So we're going to be talking in this next episode because we kind of be able to, essentially test the water, if you will, of being able to walk through. We define a little bit of mental health, what we mean with it, what our own battles are, what we were doing wrong in our battle, but we haven't hit the positive side because there is fruit, there is encouragement, there is joy that can come when you're talking about mental health.
Yeah.
And so, this next one we share on the next podcast, we're going to be able to walk through some of that.
Absolutely.
Scripture that will be encouraging, maybe some resources that would be helpful.
Absolutely. And not only that, Phil, but we're also going to talk about what does our lifestyle consist of today? What are we doing differently with our mental health? I know there's a lot of changes that are happening, and we continue to do changes. It's not sometimes that we do that one thing and all of a sudden, woo-wee, we're healed, and sometimes it is.
Sometimes.
But then sometimes it's like, okay, it's going to require that consistent work behind the scenes every day, facing ourselves in the mirror, being honest with ourselves. I don't want to give too much away, but again, thank you all for listening today. We've enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It's flown by like every other podcast has. And again, we're so thankful for you we're so thankful that you've been joining us. Again, send us your questions to outsidechurchwalls@gmail.com. Make sure that you're following us on Instagram, TikTok. Where else are we at?
Gmail.
Make sure that you're
follow us, share us, post us out there. Look, this is only the beginning, and so we're so thankful for those who've already heard a lot of great feedback from people, and so thank you for following us, and we're excited to see what's ahead. Yeah, and to that point, what you just said. I love what you just said. We're not going anywhere. We're the new faces of Christian podcasting, and we're here to stay, baby. We'll see you next time. This was Outside the Church Walls.